I've got a friend who does national voiceover work and writes jingles, and one of his big clients was Ford Motor Company. I'm sure you've heard his voice on television because he's been all the national commercials. I met him in church. I've got another friend who lives down in New Mexico who used to work for NASA and the Pentagon as a telecommunications guy, and one day in his garage he decided to apply his science brain to nanotechnology, and he would invent liquid solar-powered paint. And he's now working on a process of building a multi-million-dollar complex down in New Mexico to get solar-powered paint to market. I met him in church. I've got another friend who's a Hollywood movie producer, and every now and then he'll send me an email of premieres that are coming out, and I get on his database list, and so I get in to see premieres for free. I just took some people to go see the Young George Washington movie that's coming out on July 3rd. We already saw it. Great movie, go see it. And I know this Hollywood movie producer because I met him in church. I have another friend who's a white hat hacker. He goes into businesses in a clandestine way, and he for a long time was working for a company where the other two guys had been special ops Delta Forces guys, retired, and now they hacked businesses, and they would actually go in to see if they could physically get into a building and hack a database, and he was the technology guy who was doing all of that kind of thing. I would sit with him. He lives in Arizona. I would sit with him, and he would tell me all these incredible stories about what's going on globally and what's happening with all the things that are happening with hacking and what's going on in that kind of world. And I met him in church. I know another guy who has a YouTube channel because he had a near-death experience, went to heaven, met Jesus. Jesus kicked him out of heaven and sent him back because he wasn't done yet. And he now has a YouTube channel with hundreds of thousands of followers who watch his YouTube channel where he interviews people who had near-death experiences, and very popular, very huge. He's had me do a couple teachings for him and throw them up on his YouTube channel. And I met him in church. I know another guy who runs a major, actually two guys who run a major retreat center down in Costa Rica. And they have all these youth who come every summer, and they have this incredible youth camping experience. And the rest of the year, there's adults who can come down and hang out in Costa Rica doing ministry, reviving themselves, and being taught incredible things that are happening down in Costa Rica. And I met him in church. And I also have another friend who's retired, owns a house on Maui, and my wife and I go out and we stay in Maui for free at his house, and we look down, his balcony looks out over all of Hanauma Bay, and we can look watch everything from Molokini, where they do the diving, all the way to the city, and we stay there. We're 10 minutes from the beach. We get to stay in Maui for free, and I met him in church. I have another friend, actually, who's a financial management company in San Francisco, and he's got a ton of people who he does financial management for, and many years ago, he was in a church I was pastoring, and to this day, about 3 or 4 times, actually, I'm pretty much sure it's been every year for maybe the last 5 to 10 years, he gives our church $10,000 to keep going at the end of every calendar year. And of course, I met him in church. It's amazing when I started to scroll through my life and think about how many people I have met in church who then scatter to the winds and are in different places, many who have remained close friends, some who are special friends for a season or a time and I lost touch with, some actually who've abandoned the faith and no longer walk with Jesus. But all these people scattered all over the world that I know who I met in church. It's an incredible place for what God may do in your life and for what other people can do in your life through the connections that happen because we're united under Jesus Christ. And I bring this to your attention because I've been kind of thinking about that all week long, because we are coming to the very tail end of studying 2 Timothy, where the Apostle Paul is in Rome on trial for his life. He is not going to get out of this one. He will be actually taken out on the Appian Way and beheaded shortly after this letter is written. And he's writing this letter to his beloved companion Timothy, who'd be like his young protege, but his best friend, kind of like the son he never had. And in it, I'm amazed because his final words are not about his accomplishments. They're not about the great deeds that he has done. They're not about the impact he's had on society. They're not about the stuff he owns or the adventures he had or the places he saw. No, his final words are about the people he was close to. I've been on many situation where I'm kind of watching people at the end of life. Many times I've done a lot of funerals for people. It's amazing to me to kind of watch what happens. Those people who at the end of life are surrounded by loved ones who care about them, well-wishers, friends from everywhere who are there to be sort of get behind this person's life because of the impact this person had on them. And I've been in others where nobody was there, not even family, because nobody cared. And I've seen it all. And in the end of life, these relationships tend to be the biggest thing you could have an impact on. Let's see what Timothy says or what Paul says to Timothy in this last bit, and then we're going to unpack it a little bit. So if you've got a Bible, and you do because we provided them for you if you didn't bring your own, grab one of these, and you can turn to page 1205, and we're just going to finish our study of the book of Timothy today. And I'll be picking up in chapter 4 in verse 6. He says, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day. And not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. Be diligent to come to me quickly, for Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world, and has departed for Thessalonica. Crescens for Galatia, Titus for Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is useful to me for ministry. And Tychicus I have sent to Ephesus. Bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas when you come, and the books, especially the parchments. Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm. May the Lord repay him according to his works. You also must be aware of him, for he has greatly resisted our words. At my first defense no one stood with me, but all forsook me. May it not be charged against them. But the Lord stood with me, and he strengthened me, so that the message might be preached fully through me, and that all the Gentiles might hear. Also I was delivered out of the mouth of the lion, and the Lord will deliver me from every evil work and preserve me for his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever and ever. Amen. Greet Prisca and Aquila and the household of Onesiphorus. Erastus stayed in Corinth, but Trophimus I have left in Miletus sick. Do your utmost to come before winter. Eubulus greets you, as well as Pudens, Linus, Claudia, and all the brethren. The Lord Jesus Christ be with your spirit. Grace be with you. Amen. Let's pray. Lord, I'm going to ask that through these words of the Apostle Paul, you awaken our hearts. That you allow us to examine our own lives and see ourselves in light of you and in light of our purposes. The life that we are living for you, Lord, where it's going and what we're doing. May we, Lord, see clearly, so that if there's places to make adjustments, you could let us make them. If there's places, Lord, that we would double down, that you would allow us to see that. But let us see ourselves and see you, Jesus, through the light of the Apostle Paul's word and the power of your Holy Spirit here today. I ask in your name. Amen. All right, I've got this little handout because I'm being told lately you guys are enjoying the handouts. You don't have to do it, but if you want to, you can follow along on the two-sided handout as I scroll through what I am observing in this particular text and this passage. And so I'm looking at the opening verses, and Paul is evaluating a life that was well lived. He's evaluating who he is and what he's done. He says, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing." And I look at this whole thing, it's like to unpack it a little bit. The first thing is, it's only what you do for Christ that will stand. Keeping in mind, Paul's looking at this. He's not talking about his adventures and his stuff. It's only the things that you do for Jesus Christ that will stand. All the rest of your life will disappear and fade away. All the stuff that you have accumulated, believe it or not, although it's precious to you, will be a burden on someone else when you go. I've watched it. I've cleaned out many a house. I've seen people who, like, they died and all their stuff just became junk that someone else now had to deal with. It's amazing to kind of look at that. All the accomplishments are now faded because there's no more left. And new accomplishments are replacing the old ones. It is only what you do for Jesus Christ that will stand in the end. And then Paul says he's poured out as a drink offering. What does it mean to be poured out as a drink offering? Well, the interesting thing is this actually occurs in the Bible. And it's a symbolic act of consecration. When you took a drink and you had wine, usually 90% of the time it was wine, you would pour the wine out. You wouldn't sip it. You would pour it out, usually on the altar, and that would be a sign of giving something to God and consecrating something to God, as purifying something before God. And so you'd pour it out on the altar of consecration. It symbolized surrendering your life and your resources to God, and it recognizes God is sovereign. God provided this, God gave this to me, and I'm giving it back to God. And the first time you ever see a drink offering poured out actually is in Genesis 35, and it's Jacob. And Jacob has just had this vision of God appearing to him going up and down, and the angels going up and down on a ladder, and he places up a headstone there, and he calls this place Bethel, house of God. God must be here. He's on his way fleeing his home, going off to meet his uncle Laban to try to pick up a wife there. And as soon as he sets the stone up, he pours a drink offering on it and consecrates this stone, which is like, we're like, okay, and probably not wine, he probably poured water, but he's living in the desert. And he's on his own. He's got a long way to go. Pouring out water on that stone was quite the sacrifice. That's the first time you see a drink offering. And then throughout the rest of the Pentateuch, first 5 books of the Bible, Penta, 5, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the books of Moses, the Torah, it's in the sacrificial system. If you kept reading on all the offerings, it's fascinating how much like a lamb, every time you sacrificed a lamb, you would pour a quart of wine on the altar. Every time you did a ram, about a half gallon of wine was also to be poured. Every time you did a bull, a gallon of wine was supposed to be poured on the altar. Every time they had a sacrifice, this was always included. And it's interesting, there's one spot where David pours water out as a consecrated offering. And it's not mentioned where this happens in the storyline, but the very end of his life it's mentioned, kind of like by the way, there was this time that he wants to mention. And it's fascinating because in 2 Samuel chapter 23 it says this: David was then in the stronghold, meaning he's hiding from Saul. And the garrison of the Philistines was then in Bethlehem. Bethlehem is David's hometown. So the Philistines, their arch enemies, have taken over David's hometown. They're moving into whatever houses they want. They're taking whatever stuff they want. They're abusing the people any way that they want to. The Philistines are now holding his hometown. And he's on the outside looking in with his warriors. Saul's not helping out. And he's got these warriors. He's not sure what to do. Should he take the town? Should he stay out of it? What should he do? Every citizen of that town is a friend of his. And David says with longing, "Oh, that someone would give me a drink of the water from the well at Bethlehem, which is by the gate." See, David's longing for, oh man, that's my hometown. I want to drink the water from the well that I used to go to all the time. And it says, so the 3 mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines, drew water from the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. And nevertheless, he would not drink it, but he poured it out to the Lord. And he said, "Far be it from me, Lord, that I would do this. Is this not the blood of the men who went in jeopardy of their lives?" Therefore, he would not drink it. He was just in passing, sitting outside the gate, looking up at his hometown hill, saying, "Oh man, if I could only drink from the water that I used to drink from when I was a kid." And his henchmen, his guys surround him, the 3 mighty men go, "We'll do that for you." They don't say anything. Just get a little group together, and they go up to the garrison of Philistines. They break through the gate. Who knows how many Philistines they slaughtered. They get in a big hullabaloo of a fight. They put a cup in the well, get some water out of it, and bring it all the way back down to David and say, "Here's you go, we've granted your wish." I mean, that's some loyal companions, isn't it? And David looks at this whole thing and he realizes, wow, the sacrifice you guys have made, the risks that you were willing to take, what you're willing to do for me. If I drink this, it's sort of like my hubris, my pride will rise up. And so instead of me drinking this water, let's take this water and pour it to God, because what you guys did was a mighty deed, was a powerful deed, was a risky deed, and I'm not going to take the glory for that. Let's give that glory back to God. And he pours that drink offering out. The Apostle Paul is saying the same thing. His whole life is being poured out and given to God. It's a consecration. It's a sacrifice. It's saying everything about me, the glory all goes to God. It doesn't come back to me. I don't sit here looking at what I've done and talking about how much I've accomplished. I just look at it all and say it all goes to God. His life's being poured out as a drink offering. And he knows his life was well lived. And then he says, the time of my departure is near. Interesting, the word used for departure there, the actual Greek word that he uses, it means to loose a ship from its moorings, like to untie a ship from the dock and let her go. It's also a word, the same word is used when they talk about soldiers who strike a camp and pack everything up and get ready to go. Paul is saying his whole life is now being let go. He knows he's dying. He knows he's not going to make it out of this. He knows he will be executed for his faith by the very words he uses. And then I love this. He says, I have fought the fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. I love this word. The word he uses for fight is not really the word for a battle of a soldier. It's actually the contest in the Olympic Games. It's actually a battle of a contest of like a wrestling match or a boxing match, or one of the things that have been in the Olympic Games. One that requires every effort, every discipline. Metaphorically, it meant to fight opposition and temptation. He means his whole life he has fought temptation, he has fought opposition like a great athlete, like an Olympic champion fighting against the enemies that would bring him down. That's what he's done. To the Greeks, this word for fight was a contest of the most honorable kind. He's done the most honorable kind of fighting there is. And he says, I have finished the race. The word finished, he means completed it. Come to the end. And the word race is a word that means a course. It's not like a 100-yard dash. It more like picture instead like a long cross-country race. And he ran through the course. And if you haven't figured it out by now, your life is an obstacle course. The race you're on is not a 100-yard dash. The race you are on is a long, drawn-out obstacle course with many barriers and many things trying to stop you, and creeks to jump, and hills to climb, and stuff to jump around, and stuff to dive down, and stuff to figure out how to get where you're going to. You are on the race that God has laid out for you, different from everybody else in the room, and your life is an obstacle course. And God has planned it that way, because he's using all of that stuff, all the good, the bad, the difficult, the harsh, to shape you into who he wants you to be. And Paul was saying the same thing. And when he gets to the end of the line, he realizes this was all God's plan. This was the course laid out for me. The Greeks would eventually use this term, course, race. They would use it for a career or an occupation or a life journey. The word would be used the same. Paul's saying, I have finally completed the obstacle course God set out for me, the full race. And then he says, I have kept the faith. He's watched over it. He's preserved it. He's kept the truth of the gospel unaltered, unchanged, not watered down. How much easier it would have been to just water it down a little bit here and there. To just not say the hard things he needed to say. To compromise here and there would have been so much easier, because Paul took quite the beating, literally, for proclaiming Jesus Christ. And at any time he could have backed off some of his claims. He could have compromised with the Greeks. He could have compromised with the Jews and their law. He could have said, okay, well, we'll do a few of the things of the law just to make you guys happy. Okay, we'll nullify some of your Greek practices are kind of pagan. We'll just add one or two of the pagan practices in. He could have done that, but he didn't. He kept the faith. He held on to it all the way to the end. And if you haven't figured out by now, the Christian life is challenging. He's telling us it's challenging. The idea that you're going to follow Jesus and it's going to all be easy peasy, no problem. He's going to make you rich, you're never going to get sick, and you can have anything you want because you follow Jesus, is a lie from the pit of hell. When you follow all the lives of the great saints, it's challenging, it's difficult, it's hard, and it's looking for people who are willing to fight the fight, who are willing to finish the race, and who are going to keep the faith when they get to the very end. Well, I've watched a lot of people who never finish the race. Oh, they're on a course. I don't think the one God laid out for them. And I've watched a lot of people who even at middle age or even at young age did not keep the faith, but let go of it and compromise so that they could live a simpler life, they thought, or an easier life. It's just easier to do this right now. And so they let go of keeping the faith. Paul held on to it. And he said because he did, there's a crown. He's going to receive this crown. And this is not a king's crown. This crown is not of a ruler. This is the crown that an Olympic champion would receive. They would receive originally the wreath. It would be a wreath of like oak leaves or different branches woven together. So think more like a plant of some kind woven together. And it's a singular crown around your head. And it's a champion of the Olympic Games would receive it. Eventually, they would take that same image of victory, of conquest, of being a leader. They would take that crown and they would cast it into gold. And so Roman emperors and other great leaders who won great military victories would get an oak leaf crown, but the oak leaf was solid gold. And Paul is saying this is the crown he's getting. It's not one of being a ruler, it's one of being a victorious champion. They would wear these wreaths at festivals. If you had the golden wreath given to you, you could walk into the festival. Everything was free for you. You're the champion. You don't get to pay for anything. Everything's handed to you for free. It's the honor. If you were invited to a party in a high, swanky Roman villa, and you came in as the guest of honor, and he presented you with this wreath, with this crown, it meant the whole party's in honor of you. You are the guest of honor at this particular party. And Paul is saying that's what he's receiving from God. And not only is he receiving it, but he's saying this crown, these types of crowns, the crowns are laid up for anyone who's loved the appearing of Jesus Christ. And I think there's a double meaning to appearing. One, when he appeared and showed up and died on the cross. And those who acknowledge that are receiving a crown. And when he appears again, they're receiving a crown. And so he's laying this up so all who've loved Jesus are going to receive this. And there's nothing, this is a crazy thing, because Paul's life, when you look at the Apostle Paul's life, he is not a Christian life I would want. I don't know if you've ever really looked at Paul. You don't have to try to write this down because you'll never keep up. But the Apostle Paul, and this is where he is in icon art, and the Greek Orthodox Church, they believe when they paint the images, that the very images of these apostles was truly passed down. So when someone paints a painting of Paul, he's always bald with a little tuft of hair up front, because that's how they believe he actually looked. And you're not free to paint Paul any way you want to paint him. They're like, no, we've preserved his image in the icon art. They're saying that's really what the Apostle Paul legit looked like, because we've been passing this artwork down for centuries. And you look at his life, he's born in Tarsus, which is up there on the kind of the very southern coast of what is present-day Turkey, below Damascus, way north of Jerusalem. About 5 AD, he's born there. He's born to a Jewish family. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. Because he's born in Tarsus, he automatically gets Roman citizenship, because they had sided with the right guy in the right battle at one time. Anyone born in Tarsus was an automatic Roman citizen. So he gets all these various rights that other people didn't get. Somewhere in his youth, he moves to Jerusalem, and he studies under the renowned Rabbi Gamaliel. And his plan is to become as high as he can get in the echelon of Jewish leadership. He has extensive knowledge of the Hebrew Scriptures, and he would know the high priest personally. He was an up-and-comer, genius guy, moving through the ranks rapidly. He was the young man they were picking to do great and mighty things later. And of course, we know the story that in his youth, he has a powerful encounter with Jesus Christ. He hates Christians. And he actually begins his life, after he's got all this knowledge and he's up and coming as a Jew, he begins his life saying, I'm going to rise in rank and power by actually abusing, torturing, and killing Christians. And he's the main ringleader doing that in Jerusalem. And he finally figures Jerusalem's not enough. And there's a bunch of guys who've gone up to Damascus, and there's Christians up there. And so he gets a letter from the high priest saying, give me permission to travel all the way to Damascus and grab the Christians there and bring them back down here. And we'll get them to renounce their faith, or we'll torture them, or we'll kill them. And the high priest gives him the letter. So off he goes on the journey. Halfway to Damascus, Jesus meets him on the road, blinds him, knocks him down, knocks all the guys with him down too. They don't hear the voice, but he does. And he hears a voice saying, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he gets up from the ground, has this encounter with Jesus, and he's blind. He goes into Damascus being led like a blind man. Can you imagine a scholar losing his sight? He can no longer read the scriptures. He can no longer learn the things he needs to learn. His whole life's gone. And he gets in there, and Jesus sends a Christian to him. Ananias lays hands on him, prays, scales fall from his eyes, and he now realizes this Jesus that I've been hating, and the people following this Jesus that I've been hating, they're actually on the right side. I've been wrong, they've been right. Jesus is God. And he spends 3 years in Damascus and Arabia. He doesn't go back to Jerusalem. So for the next 3 years, he learns, he studies, he rereads, he figures everything out. He goes back to the scriptures to try to find and discover Jesus, learn about Jesus, and he doesn't go back to Jerusalem at all. And then he finally, after 3 years, returns to Jerusalem, and he's done 3 years of hardcore study. When he returns to Jerusalem, he begins preaching, and the Jewish people there hate him so much because his preaching is so good. And they decide they want to kill him. The Christians are afraid of him because, hey, that's the guy who put my cousin to death. Hey, that's the guy that arrested my aunt, and she went to prison. They beat her there. I'm not trusting him. So the Christians don't trust him, and the Jews hate him. And finally, the Christian community gathers around him and says, we need to send your butt back to Tarsus. They put him on a ship, send him back to Tarsus, and it's interesting in the book of Acts it says, and there was peace in the region. You get rid of Saul, and there's peace finally, right? He spends 10 years unknown, undiscovered, quietly in Tarsus, minding his own business. We don't even know what he does. 10, not even worth mentioning in the Bible, years hanging out in Tarsus. In about 44 AD, the church's headquarters have moved to Antioch, not because the apostles are there, but so much because actually the move of God was there. And in 44 AD, it's going hog wild, and they don't know how to teach these new Gentiles. They don't know how to teach these converts. And Barnabas, who's there, says, we need to bring in one of the best teachers that we can find to help teach these people. He goes, I know a guy. I met him in church. And he goes to Tarsus. He brings him back to Antioch. And for 2 years, he becomes the chief teacher of the powerful church that's in Antioch. And Antioch's there just on the coast, just across from Tarsus there. And so after 10 years of obscurity, he's now becoming quite popular. Well, the Lord sets aside and sends Paul and Barnabas, and he says, you're going to go on 3 missionary journeys. And in the next 10 years, he goes on 3 different missionary journeys. First one, he sort of stays in Lower Asia Minor. That's where all the big populated cities were, by the way, back in the Roman days. Turkey was the hub of where all the big Roman powerhouse cities, the wealth was there, the power was there, a lot of things going on in that region. It was on all the major trade routes. There's his first journey, and then he goes on a bigger journey later, and a few years later, and then an even bigger one. He repeats kind of the journey he was on and comes back. So 3 missionary journeys over the course of 10 years. Finally, at the end of the third one, he goes back to Jerusalem where they arrest him. And they arrest him in Jerusalem, and they're going to put him on trial, and the people who've arrested him are the ones who are going to be the judges. He's like, this is a rigged court system. This isn't going to work. And so he appeals to Rome. Because he's a Roman citizen, he has the right to appear before the emperor. And they can't do anything about it. So they pack him up, they send him to Caesarea. They're going to plan to ship him to Rome. Well, when he gets to Caesarea, he'll spend 2 years in Caesarea, which is the official capital of that region. That's where the governors were. And for 2 years, he stays in prison in Caesarea, but he will preach to 2 Roman governors, Felix and Festus, and he will preach to King Agrippa when he's in prison there. And then he's finally shipped off to Rome, and on the way, it's too late in the year, and so they get shipwrecked on the island of Malta. And so he has to spend some time in Malta before he can even get to Rome, because he gets shipwrecked a night and a day. Finally arrives in Rome, and he will spend 2 years in prison in Rome. And all along the way, through all of these journeys and all these things that happen, he would go hungry. He would not have enough money to make it. He would be in certain cities and they would beat him. He would be in certain cities and they literally tried to kill him many times. He would be in certain cities and they would just drive him out. He would be in certain cities he would have to escape over the wall to get away from, because everywhere he went, it was a violent opposition trying to kill him, trying to destroy him. He's beaten with rods. He's whipped with whips. He's stoned with stones. I mean, he does not have it easy. The whole time he's doing these trips and these journeys, he does not have it easy. He arrives in Rome and he's 2 years in prison. And here's where it kind of gets weird. Some people say, well, it looks like, trying to fit all the stories of Paul together, he must have been released, because we know he wrote some letters from Rome, and those letters would become books of our Bible. And then he must have been released, which doesn't get recorded in the book of Acts, and no letters were written after that. And at some point, he's rearrested around 67 AD, and now the Emperor Nero, who was just a young guy, 57 when he first did this appeal, and he said, hey, I appeal to Rome. Nero had just taken the throne. He was a young man, and Nero's mom was kind of running the show, because Nero was just super young, trying to figure out how to be a Roman emperor, and things were pretty cool. And so when he appeals to Nero the first time, Nero's all right. But now all this time has gone by, and the interesting thing is, it's still the same appeal to Nero. And it's like, hey, aren't you supposed to be appearing before the emperor? And he's like, yeah, well, it kind of got put on hold. And here it is, all these years later, he's like, well, we got to get you back to Nero. Well, by now, Nero's changed. Nero has gone nuts. And now the Roman emperor he's going to appeal to, when he's writing this letter of 2 Timothy, is gone kind of psycho. He's killed his own mom. He's killed his sisters. He's killed off his wife. He kicked his wife to death. And then he felt so bad about it, he took a young slave boy and he married the slave boy who looked like his wife that he had kicked to death. I mean, he's killed other senators. He's just had a bloodbath of an empire. He's squandered the money of the empire so bad that Rome, the great citizen of Rome, is going bankrupt because how much he's squandered the money. He's hated by about everybody, and he's decided that he wants to be an actor and not an emperor. So he's getting on the stage, he's reciting poetry, and he's dressing up as a woman and going on stage and playing female roles on the stage, which is scandalous to the Romans. And so now this is the guy he's going to appeal to. This is his life. Up and coming, intelligent, handpicked for great things, ends up falling in love with Jesus, and he has hard, brutal things happen to him. That's not a life I would want as a Christian, but that's his Christian life. And so the interesting thing about him now, he's writing this letter, and he's mentioning to Timothy all of the companions who've been scattered, the scattering of his Christian companions. Be diligent to come to me quickly, he says in verse 9. For Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world, and has departed for Thessalonica. Crescens for Galatia, Titus for Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is useful to me for ministry. And Tychicus I sent to Ephesus. Bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas when you come, and the books, especially the parchments. Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm. May the Lord repay him according to his works. So you also must beware of him, for he has greatly resisted our words. I look at this whole list of guys. I don't know what you've ever thought. If you're a Christian, you've read the New Testament, you've read the book of Acts. I've always kind of pictured it was Paul. And once in a while, somebody's hanging out with him, but maybe a little trio, maybe a little quartet of guys who traveled around and did these missionary journeys, and off they went. Partly because it begins with God saying, set aside Paul and Barnabas for me. I got a mission for them. And you kind of picture, well, that's the mission. But if you really get down and start reading it, they were never a small group. They were always a large group of guys who traveled. Now Paul is mentioning to Timothy all the guys who've been their fellow companions in ministry. Some not, but most all of them, and where they are now and what's going on. And he mentions these guys. He wants to see Timothy before it's too late. That's the first one. When he says, come, be diligent to come to me quickly. So Paul knows, I am not going to last long. So don't delay. Hurry up and come, because this is the last moment we may get to see each other. As far as we know in recorded history, Timothy couldn't make the journey in time, and he never did see Paul. And then he mentions these guys, Demas. Demas is interesting. He's mentioned actually 3 times in the Bible. He's mentioned in Colossians chapter 4 or 4:14 and Philemon 1:22 through 24. And Demas is one of the traveling companions with Paul and Timothy all this time. And all this time, he was one of their faithful cohorts. He's one of the guys who was with them. He'd done missions work with them. He'd traveled with them. He'd gone hungry with them. He'd seen him go to jail. He'd seen him get beaten. He'd been on this journey the whole time. And now Paul's in prison in Rome. And after all these years, he says, yeah, Demas quit. Demas couldn't take it. Demas decided that rather than sacrifice what's going to be sacrificed, he's going to leave. And he went back to Thessalonica. Thessalonica up in northern Greece, kind of the Macedonian territory. It was one of the cities that had the most hostile Jewish presence to Paul. And so some scholars think Demas sort of gave in and went back to his Jewish roots. And he decided to go back to Thessalonica and hang out there. It got harder because he couldn't take it. He didn't know what to do. And he goes back, and some think back to his Jewish roots, like, I'm going to kind of give up on this Christian faith and go back to Judaism and sort of go back and be one of those guys, which is really ironic because Nero would wage war on Israel and the Jewish nation would be destroyed in less than 4 years. I've known a lot of Demases in my time. People I've done ministry with, people I was in Christian bands with, writing and recording songs and making albums and playing and performing. People I've done church with, people I did church planting with. Oh, we're there with you. We'll be the long haul. We'll do it. I remember so many times I've seen Demas as people who come with you, and for a short time you think we're all in and we're going to do lifetime together work, and you sow your life and your heart and everything into them, and then one day they just quit. And you don't know why. It just got hard. It got difficult. Things didn't work out the way they wanted, and so they just quit. I remember when we set out from downtown to build this church, We had about, 50 people who were part of our church congregation then, not including the homeless street people, the addicts and the drunks, but just the people who were, coming to do this journey. And we had one of our leaders, and it was Jim Fisher, who's currently our chairman of this board, or the board right now. He and another guy went around and they talked to all of them, and they said, look, will you commit to serve and tithe and give for 1 year? If you'll do it for 1 year, we'll buy that building, we'll move up there to the Garland District, and we'll do this job. But we can't do it if everybody quits. If you're planning on quitting, let us know. If you're not going to serve and tithe, you're not going to give, and you're going to quit, let us know. And we went, okay. So they actually produced a written document, said, sign here, saying you will serve, you will tithe, you will stay with us on this journey for 1 year. At the end of 1 year, you're free to go, and no one's going to be mad at you or anything. And so all these families, they're in, they signed, they said, yes, we're in, we're going to go. 6 families dropped before we even left that building, but after we had signed the deed to buy this place. If you'd have quit before, we wouldn't have signed this. We wouldn't have done this. And by the time we moved up here, there was literally just 25 of us left. 25 people entered this building like, oh my God, what are we going to do now? And some of them, they weren't young pups. They weren't ready to swing a hammer and grab a crowbar and tear down the ceiling. I've known many a Demas in my time, and you know what? It hurts. It hurts. You don't shrug that one off and you don't say later, oh, well, that's too bad. I don't know, Demas left me. I know the Apostle Paul wrote those words, he's like, and even Demas left me. He decided he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do this journey. After all we've been through, he gave up on you? Yeah, after all we've been through. Paul goes on and he talks about other guys, though. Crescens, he's only mentioned here in the Bible, never mentioned again. He goes to Galatia. Bible doesn't know anything about him, but church tradition tells us he would become the bishop of Galatia, which was a region in northern or middle of Turkey, and that he would be martyred there under the Emperor Trajan. Some, because they're not sure because his name appears in some writings in France too, think that he actually went to Lyon and he started the church. He was the one who brought the Christianity to the French for the first time in the city of Lyon. He mentions Titus. We're going to study Titus, the book of Titus, next week, so I won't say much more about Titus now because he's going to come up a lot. And he mentions his buddy Luke. Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke. Luke, who wrote the book of Acts. Luke's mentioned in Colossians and Philemon. Luke, who traveled with Paul and never left and never quit. Luke was a physician. He was a doctor. He was a great scholar. He would write. Luke's with him. And then he mentions Mark, whose real name is John Mark, and he would write the Gospel of Mark. He's mentioned in the book of Acts. He's mentioned in Acts 15. He's mentioned in Colossians, mentioned in Philemon. And the interesting thing about this guy is John Mark and Paul had a terrible falling out on the very first missionary journey. On the very first missionary journey, when Paul set out from Antioch with Barnabas, Mark was part of the group. And they went to this island, the Isle of Rhodes, and there Paul's preaching, and the governor of the Isle of Rhodes says, come and tell me about this new, what you're reporting. So Paul goes and he tells the governor, and the governor converts to Christianity. The governor believes in Jesus. And it's like, but he's a Roman. You can't have a Roman governing official believing in Jesus. He's not a Jew. This doesn't count. And it made John Mark mad, and John Mark left. And he went back to Jerusalem and abandoned him on the first missionary journey. When they decided to go out on the second missionary journey, they're going to go again, Barnabas and Paul. And Barnabas says, well, let's take John Mark with us. And Paul's like, no way. No way. We had that guy once. No way. And actually, Barnabas and Paul get into such a fierce argument, they part company. And Paul takes Silas and goes on the second missionary journey. Barnabas tries to take some guys, and he takes John Mark, and he doesn't appear again in the Bible. His story that isn't told. And so we end up with, here it is, all this time later, all these years later, everything has happened, everything has gone down, and I don't even know where John Mark is, what city he's in, because it isn't mentioned, but we know that Timothy knows where he's at. And all these years later, Paul is writing Timothy saying, oh, and pick up John Mark and bring him here. I need him. He's useful to me. Some sort of major reconciliation happened. Some huge falling out had happened. We got the story on the huge falling out. But years later, Paul and Mark had reconciled. They had put aside their differences. I suppose the test of time had tempered both of them down a little bit, grew one up and softened the other one. And now at the end of his life, he's going back and picking a guy that he wants to be with him at the end, who he had parted company with in a brutal fashion years and years before. I like that little piece of Mark, and this is the only place we get it right here in 2 Timothy. This is the only way we know there was reconciliation, is this letter right here. And then Tychicus, he's mentioned several times. He's actually mentioned 5 times in the Bible: Acts, Titus, Ephesians, Colossians. He's in the city of Ephesus, which is the Los Angeles of the Roman Empire, great big city on the coast of Turkey. And Tychicus is he's been a faithful traveling and companion of Paul and the gang. And many times when you see his name pop up, he's being handed letters, and he's like Paul's courier. He'll send Tychicus to a city and say, okay, go to that city, follow up, see what's going on, go back to that city we were at, and you be my voice. He's like an ambassador for the Apostle Paul. And then Carpus, we don't know. He's never mentioned any other times in the Bible, but right here he's mentioned in the city of Troas, which you and I would know is the city of Troy, where, Helen of Troy and all that. He's in that city, and we don't know anything about him, but we know that Paul stayed at his house, and he leaves this winter cloak, which was highly valuable, books and parchments, which probably were legal documents, could have been some scripture books, and some of his own writings and that kind of thing. And so he says to Timothy, go to Carpus's house, pick up that super valuable stuff, and bring it with me when you come to Rome. Most likely because that's all Paul has left at the end of his life to give away. And he's going to make sure Timothy gets that stuff. Bring it here. I could reuse it. I want to go through it, and then I'll hand you all the legal documents and explain it to you. But as far as we know, that would never happen. And then Alexander, there's 2 Alexanders. One is mentioned in Acts 19, and he's a coppersmith, a silversmith, and he starts a riot in Ephesus against the teaching of Jesus, which gets Paul kicked out of Ephesus. The other one is a guy who is a heretical teacher that Paul has to turn over to Satan. So it could have been either one of those as Alexander. And Tanya and I, interestingly, we look at our lives and all the churches we've been in all the times like, man, there's some people still standing with us. There's people standing with us I never would have guessed. Like the guy who gives our church about $10,000 a year every year in December. And we knew him in a church 25 years ago. Right? And I've seen him one time personally in 25 years. We talk. We'll talk on the phone, and every now and then I'll send him a letter. But, man, he's kept this church going. And it's interesting, all the people that we would look back on, the friendships that we had. And even when we went to Israel in February, 4 of the people who went were old friends from churches that we were at 25 years ago. And just the wonderful friendships that have been built and the adventures that we have had, but also we've known a lot of people who are no longer with us. An awful lot of people who are no longer with us. In fact, we were talking as I was putting this sermon together, do you know if everybody who ever committed to the Gathering House, whoever signed and said, I want to be a member of your church, I want to support this church, I'll be there, I'm going to hang with you, I'm going to stay with it, we would actually fill this building 3 times. Of all the people who, if they would have stayed, would pack this place out. I don't know why. They move on. Some move because they move. Others just literally quit. They just quit, and they just disappear. And we've seen it a lot, and you know what? It hurts every time. It hurts every time. And you want to fix it, and you realize you can't. And so we have this long history of people who have come, made promises, and left. And I look at Paul's life, and I go, oh, that's really what happens. But also people who made promises, and God moved them on, but you stayed solid with them. And they still matter in your life today. And they still count today. And then he goes on and he says he's faced to the end with faithful courage. At my first offense, no one stood with me, but all forsook me. May it not be charged against them. But the Lord stood with me and strengthened me so that the message might be preached fully through me, and that all the Gentiles might hear. Also, I was delivered out of the mouth of the lion, and the Lord will deliver me from every evil work and preserve me for his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory forever and ever. Amen. Paul seems to have this little bit of a contrast where he's like, well, I know I'm being poured out as a drink offering, but it's okay, I'm in the hands of Jesus. I know people are intending evil against me, but evil is not going to conquer me. I'm going to stand with Jesus. In the end, I'll be with Jesus. And he's interesting because we would find out that he would preach to Nero. He would actually stand in front of insane Nero and preach to him because that's what would happen. It was foretold in the book of Acts. Actually, go back one. In the book of Acts, in Acts 27, when they're being shipwrecked, and on the island of Malta, as Paul's being sent to Rome, he has to gather everybody around and says, hey, everybody, it's okay. An angel appeared to me and told me that none of us are going to die, The ship's going to run aground. It's going to wreck. Throw the cargo overboard. It's not savable anyway. But if you stay with me, no lives will be lost. Because an angel of the Lord appeared to me last night and told me I must stand before Nero and preach to Nero. And so they all, okay, and that's exactly what happens. They all get shipwrecked, but no lives are lost. And eventually, Paul will preach to Nero himself. And he says at the opening trial, everyone had deserted, meaning there's like the arraignment, the opening thing. He's standing there, he's like, okay, I'm going to give my testimony of why I'm here, right? Because he's going to appear before Nero, and the emperor's going to say, who is this criminal? What has he done? Why is he here? And he's going to give testimony. It's interesting that he says nobody was there with him. He went in by himself. Nobody was able to stand with him. I think some of them wanted to but couldn't make it. Others had run away. This was a bad time. They just deserted. The only one who stood with him was Jesus. Just Jesus and Paul standing there facing the mighty emperor Nero. And he says, he's delivered me out of the mouth of the lion. In other words, he must have been convincing enough in the opening round to get a reprieve. He didn't get freedom, but he didn't get sentenced to death either. So he must have been convincing enough in the opening round that, like, wow, what's going on here? And all the court gathers to hear. So when he preaches to Nero, there's hundreds of high-ranking Roman officials hearing the gospel at the same time. And then the interesting thing is that at this particular time, Nero was scapegoating Christians for the Great Fire of Rome, which had happened in 64 AD. So imagine you are a Christian now standing before the emperor, appealing your case on something you were arrested for years and years ago. But now the emperor you're standing in front of hates Christians. And you're standing before that emperor defending Christianity. And why Nero hates Christians, he didn't really hate them. It's just that this fire had ravaged Rome, burnt about a third of the city down, mostly the poor quarter. And then Nero had shown up later with all these design plans to put a new palace where all the burnt section was. So everybody figured he did it on purpose. And now he needs to find somebody to blame, so he starts blaming Christians. At this particular time, he's having Christians dressed up in animal skins thrown into the arena, and wild dogs and lions and leopards are tearing Christians apart, dressed in wild animal skins. He's taking Christians and he's crucifying them, putting them up and down in his garden, and when nighttime comes, he covers them in pitch and lights them on fire while they're still alive. He's killing Christians right and left. And now here's Paul standing before him saying, I'm going to give a defense of Christianity. It's amazing he got a reprieve. Because now Nero's in this position of, wait a minute, you're the guys I'm blaming, and I'm putting you to death so the heat's off me. And if you convince me Christianity's okay, now I got a double problem, because now everybody's going to ask, well, then why are you killing the Christians if they're okay? So Paul knows he's not going to come out of this one, because Nero actually has to find him guilty to justify Nero's behavior. I find it fascinating that Jesus made sure the emperor of Rome heard the gospel before he died. And Nero would actually commit suicide about a year later. He'd be driven out of Rome by all the elites. They'd put him on, they basically put him on trial in absentia, and they actually put a death warrant on him. They're going to execute him, and so he escaped Rome, and as the soldiers were coming to arrest him, he cut his own throat with a knife, and just before he did, his dying words were something to the effect of, alas, the world is losing a great actor. Right? The talent the world could have had. And so that's how he dies. Not even a year later, when in AD 68. It's interesting because I look at this and I think, some relationships will carry you to the end. In verses 19 and 22, Paul starts listing these other people, Prisca and Aquila. Her real name is Priscilla, as she's mentioned other times in the Bible. So he's got a little nickname for her. Oh, she's Prisca to me. Everybody else calls her Priscilla, her formal name. But she's Prisca to me, and Aquila, and the household of Onesiphorus. Erastus stayed in Corinth, but Trophimus I have left in Miletus sick. Do your utmost to come before winter. Eubulus greets you, as well as Pudens, Linus, Claudia, and all the brethren. The Lord Jesus Christ be with your spirit. Grace be with you all. Amen. Interesting group. Priscilla and Aquila are actually two very, very smart people. They show up in Corinth at a time when Paul is getting there. There's a young guy named Apollos who arrives, and he's preaching the Messiah is coming, and what he's preaching, the Messiah is probably going to suffer. The Messiah is probably going to die. The Messiah is probably going to rise from the dead. I've been studying the scriptures, and this is what I see the scriptures saying. And they pull him aside and say, you know, everything you're saying is pretty cool. Have you heard of Jesus? And he had not heard of Jesus. He was preaching the Messiah, and so they pull him aside and they teach him. Well, Apollos becomes so powerful as an orator and as a preacher that actually he stays in Corinth, and after Paul leaves, Apollos kind of becomes the man, and then the Corinthian church starts arguing over who's greater, Paul or Apollos. And some people, well, I came to Christ under Paul, so I'm the first thing. And other guy, well, I came to Christ under Apollos, who's way smarter than Paul. And they get in this argument, and Paul has to actually write a letter to the Corinthian church saying, is it Paul? Is it Apollos? Is it Paul? We're nothing. It's Jesus, guys. Stop arguing about this dumb stuff. It's Jesus. And so Apollos would become this great friend, and Priscilla and Aquila would eventually end up in Ephesus, and they were two powerful house people in the church. They were great teachers, great leaders. Onesiphorus, he's only mentioned twice in the Bible, both times in 2 Timothy. He may have already died by now, but he was of great service to the Apostle Paul. He and his household, which meant everybody who lived in there, his kids, his nephews, whatever, was always a great source, steadfast supporters of Paul. Erastus, he is sent to Corinth, the city of Corinth, where Apollos had been, where Paul had been, where Priscilla and Aquila had been. And he's now in Corinth, and he's hanging out there. He gets two mentions in the Bible, Acts 19:22 and Romans 16:23. He's a traveling companion of Paul and Timothy, and Paul would send him up to Macedonia. And actually, when Paul goes to Jerusalem at the end of his third missionary journey, and they arrest Paul, they have to come up with a crime. And the crime they come up with is, you brought a Greek person into the holy temple of God, and you brought him inside the temple courts where only Jews are allowed. And the person they were saying he brought was Trophimus. He never went there. It was a lie. But that was the excuse they used to arrest Paul, to get him put on trial in the first place. Eubulus, we don't, or let's go with Pudens. Did I leave Eubulus off my list? Yeah, after Trophimus should be Eubulus. He's not mentioned any other place. That's probably why I left him off my list. He doesn't appear in the Bible, and he doesn't appear in history, so I probably left him off my list for that reason. Pudens, only time he's mentioned in the Bible is right here. Some say, when they look at old records, he was a Roman senator, a convert, and would eventually become a martyr for Jesus. He was a high-ranking Roman senator. Linus, oh yeah, he plays piano, right? You're thinking that. Linus actually hangs out with Paul. The only time he's mentioned in the Bible, but the interesting thing is, you know who the second pope of Rome is after Peter? Linus. He's mentioned as the second pope in the Catholic line. And then Claudia, some say the wife of Pudens, others say she was a British lady who would take the gospel to Britain. And he says, and all the brethren. He's got all these people who are friends who have left him, some who have left the faith, some who stayed in the faith, but God just sent them into a new place. And he's got these people who are kind of nearby, and he's saying to Timothy, they're still here. It's amazing the network of people that Paul has. A network of people spread out, and if you looked at where they were on a map, and I was going to do that, but thought it would be too long. Where's Corinth? Where's Dalmatia? Where are these guys? They're spread all over the Roman Empire. And Paul is saying, I got friends here, and I got friends in this town, I got friends in this place, I got friends in that town. And in the end, the Christian life is all about the people you know. I was looking at this, thinking about this whole concept of the Apostle Paul and how that relates to you and I. And it made me think of who are the people in your life now, right now, that are still with you, they're still standing. After many, many years, who's still standing with you? Who's known you for a long, long time and still doing the journey? And I got friends here. I'm looking around the room. I got friends here I've known since 1973. I got friends here I've known since, Jim, 1965? First grade, right? I got people in the room. My cousin's not here today. She's known me my whole life. Well, her whole life. I'm a couple years older than her. Who's still with you? Who's done the journey? I remember one time we sat around a fire, you and I and Fred and I and one other person, and we sat there talking about how long we'd known each other. The three of us sitting around this fire pit calculated that there were 70 years of friendship between how long we'd known each other. Who have you known for a long time? Who's still in your life? I was talking to a young pastor friend of mine a while back, and he pastors a lot of millennials, Gen Xers. And he said, you know, the thing about you, Rob, you and your generation, you know people from a long time back. Because I'm 33 years old, and I don't know anybody even from high school. No friends even from high school. And what's more, nobody in any of my group, and he knows a lot of people, nobody in my group of people in their 30s has friends that are older than 5 to 10 years. The oldest friendships go back 10 years at the most, and those are really rare. All of our friendships are fleeting, they come and go. And I'm like, well, something's wrong if your generation can't figure out how to stand side by side. And I thought about this, I thought, well, who in your life is still standing with you? Who's still there? Well, who are you going to appreciate? If they're still with you this week, tell them. Tell them what you appreciate about them. Tell them why they matter in your life. Tell them why you appreciate that they're still standing with you. And maybe it's only like, well, I've only known this person a couple of years because that's the oldest friendship I got. It's like, that's okay. That's how that friendship of 2 years turns into one in 50 years. But find out, who are you going to appreciate in life? Who are you going to tell? You matter to me because you're with me on this journey and you've been with me for a long time. And I don't say it often enough, but here's why. I care about you. And then, who are you going to thank? Right? I have people in my life that aren't actually in my life much anymore. I see them rarely. Maybe once or twice a year we'll have contact with each other. We'll check up on a phone. We'll have a phone call or an email will come by and we'll, hey, I was thinking of you the other day. You know, but they're not really in my life anymore, but they're not people I've broken, had some falling out with or anything. And I still, when I think of them with strong affection. And every now and then I need to say, oh, you know, there are these people who are at this point in my life, they're more like acquaintances than friends, but they're acquaintances I feel really good about. I should thank them. I should just send them another email and say, hey, just thinking of you, thinking about that time we did this trip, or thinking about that time we had this adventure together, or thinking about the time we did this thing together, and I just want you to know, as I was thinking about that time, I remembered you, and I remembered how much you've meant to me in my life. And even though the years have gone on and we parted company, you live in a different state, you're doing a different thing, I just want you to know that because of that season and that time in my life, I still care deeply for you. You matter to me, right? And find someone that you're going to thank for a season of your life. Might have been a long time ago. Look them up and find them. I mean, sometimes it happened. I never had a falling out with Jim. I was living in California, and I moved away. Jim and I had known each other grade school, and I mean, every time I hear John Denver and an album played John Denver, I'm like, oh, that reminds me of sitting in the living room at Jim's house. We put the album on and we listened to Almost Heaven, West Virginia, right? That's sitting in Jim's living room, and we were great. And then he went his way and I went mine. We lost touch for 15 or 20 years or something, and I think you hit 50 or something, Jim. Jim hit a birthday, one of those magic birthdays, where he said, I turned a certain age, and in that age I looked up everybody I'd ever known who mattered in my life, and I sent him a note. And he found me in California, and he sent a note, and we began to talk. And we sort of stayed in touch after that, like this sort of reigniting something after an absence of like 30 years. But there was never a falling out, so there was never nothing but affection. And to have it awaken, that's really cool, right? I got a friend from high school. He calls me now and then. He travels all over the country. He does motivational speaking at high schools and stuff. And every now and then I get a call from him. What are you doing? Oh, I'm driving across Texas, and I thought of you. I'm just going to give you a call and see how you're doing, right? And he was actually the guy that led me to Christ, John Fox. But, you know, ever after that, and I didn't know the journey that would happen. I planned to stay in California. When everything was crashing in California, I planned to move to Colorado. I did not want to come to Spokane. And we came back to Spokane, and then who was still standing? Well, Jim was still standing. Right? And so we reawakened something that I didn't know God was going to put something even stronger together. Who is it you might look back in your life and thank? They may not be here now in your life, but they were at one time and they really mattered. Find them and say something to them. And then lastly, for whom will you pray? Because there are people in your life who fell, crashed and burned. Maybe they went through a dark divorce. Maybe they lost a business. Maybe they gave up on their faith. I got a bunch of these who just gave up on their faith. And it's amazing how many times the giving up on the faith actually leads to the divorce, leads to a life that crashes. And it's like, there's certain people I should pray for. And I find that if I start praying for them, God might bring them back around into my sphere of influence. And I would say something to them. I got a couple of friends who, they've walked away from Jesus, but I don't quit praying for them. My fervent prayer is that one day Jesus will grab hold of them again and get their heart turned on fire. That they would feel the passion and the love of Christ that they had at one time and be reawakened. In your own life, you have these three categories. Who are you going to appreciate? Who's here now? Still with you, still standing. Who are you going to thank? Who once was in your life and they meant something a lot now? You never had a falling out, and you need to go back and say, I need to thank you for that season of life. You mattered to me then. And who are you going to pray for? Someone whose life of someone you cared about deeply once has crashed and burned. And if you're a person who's saying, I actually don't really have any of these categories in my life, I don't have these people, then I'm here to tell you, you're doing life wrong, if that's your situation. If you don't have people in your life who can fit any of these three categories, like, you're going through life wrong. You're destroying every relationship in your wake. You're blowing things up. You're actually undermining your own life, not theirs. You're undermining your own life. You should be able to look back in your life and say, I have people who've been with me for a long time. You should be able to look back at your life and say, I have people who were powerfully influential in my life at one time. And if you don't have those two categories, at least those two, then you're doing life wrong. You're mistaking what God has for you. He has relationships for you. In the quest to become something, or to accumulate stuff, or to gather things under your influence or your power or your ambition, you've let relationships go. And God wants to remind you, the only thing that's going to stand in the end are the relationships. In the end, only three things are eternal: God, His Word, and people. They're the only three things that are eternal. Everything else will be gone. All right, there's your homework, there's your chore. Who are you going to appreciate? Who are you going to thank? Who are you going to pray for? Stand with me as we close in prayer. Jesus, I know that your whole desire is when we put our lives in your hands and we commit to you and your Holy Spirit is placed in us. And we receive the gift of salvation so freely offered from your throne by the power of your shed blood. That the next immediate thing you want to do is bind us together with others in love and in unity who have also made that same commitment. And in that binding of love and unity, you have grand adventures for us to go on. You have intimate love and affection to solidify our lives and bolster us and keep us strong. You have so much to give through the relationships of others. And also, Lord, you want to use some of those relationships to, knock the hard edges off of us, to soften us, to teach us, to make us more loving and gracious people. Lord, I pray for those standing in this room that you will awaken in their hearts the love and affection that they have for the people around them in a powerful way. That you will cause them to remember people who were in their lives at one time and it was great. And that they would have a sense of, I need to reach out and say something. And you would call to their mind people who have fallen by the wayside and are lying in the ditch now without their faith and without their life together. And you would give them the courage and the strength to pray for those lost and broken and hurt and wounded. And Jesus, for all of us, may we be able to say in the end, I stand there with Jesus, and that I have finished my course. I have fought the good fight. I have finished my race, and I have kept the faith. Lord, make us strong in that, I pray in your holy name. Amen. All right, next week we'll start in on Titus.